designer originally from Central New York. You can hear me okay, right? Just to check. Okay, thank you. Yeah, I've been designing and landscaping and gardening with native plants for about 10 years now, almost 10 years now. I first learned about the importance of native plants from Doug Tallamy's book, Bringing Nature Home. I'm sure a lot of other people have read that and are familiar with it in this group. So I'm planning to talk for about 45 minutes and then leave about 15 minutes for questions at the end. Thanks. So, yeah. Okay, yep. So for this presentation, I kind of just want to introduce people to how to transition your landscape to native plants and ecological landscaping. It's pretty different in ways from like the conventional landscaping approach, but very valuable, obviously, to do. So where to start? I think observing what you have is really important with landscaping with native plants and ecological landscaping, because it's really like conventional landscaping tends to be more static. You put these perennials here and you want them to stay the same, and these shrubs here and trees here, and you want them to stay basically. But we're trying to create more living landscapes that are more dynamic and I think also more interesting and pretty in ways through time. So first thing, observing what you have, what existing plants are in your landscape, which are native, which aren't native, which are non-native and invasive. That's like, an important thing to note, distinction to notice. And are there any with sentimental value, like old lilacs or something like that? How much sunlight do you have in different areas? Do you get in different areas? And how much space do you have? And looking at what structure you have in your landscape, plant structure that is existing canopy trees and understory trees, shrubs, vines, tall perennials, and ground covers. Another important thing is where there are existing utilities like overhead power lines. Obviously, you don't want to plant a tall tree under that because it just won't do well with time. Another important thing is to call dig safe before you start digging in your yard, just to check if there are any underground utilities, like make sure you know where the gas lines are and stuff like that. And I just put this picture up of the cover of the book, The American Woodland Garden by Rick Dark. I think it's just really shows how the layers in the landscape are really, the layers and structure in the landscape that you're trying to go for with native plants. Anyway, it's, the foam flower, the ground, the tall overstory trees, and some shrubs, and the understory trees like the flowering dogwood. Okay. So observing what you have, what type of soil you have is really important. The texture, drainage, the pH, and the nutrient levels are all important to know, so you can pick the right native plants that'll grow well in that soil. That's another difference between native plants, gardening with native plants and more conventional landscaping, is that you don't need to fit the site to fit the plants that you want. You want to choose plants that go with the soil that you have, which I guess ideally you want to do that all the time. But so you don't typically, unless you have really compacted soils, you don't really need to do anything to amend it. So if you get a soil, how you figure out what kind of soil you have, you can get a soil test done. I think Cornell Cooperative Extension, you can send in a sample to find out. And you can also to find out the texture of the soil, like if it's clay or sandy or loam or silty, you can do a ribbon test, which you can look that up online how to do it. That's basically just getting a damp ball of soil in your hand and seeing how long of a ribbon you can make between, like squeezing it between your thumb and your forefinger. Like a clay will hold together more and your hand will fall apart faster. So, and also another thing with native plants, you can get, in a dry, sandy soil, you can get really interesting native plants like the butterfly, the orange milkweed, and blue lupin, really cool native plants. And if you have really good soils with lots of nutrients that you typically want, maybe in a more conventional type of garden, you can get more weed pressure, and you might be more likely to have more competitive plants dominating it. Other important things to know about the soil is how well drained it is. Like, is the water going to sit there or drain quickly is a really important thing to know. And the pH also, which you can get, is pretty easy to get little pH soil tests to get a general idea. Other thing, so are some areas more wet or dry? Where's their salt spray? That's important to know too. Just thinking about what you want to do in the future. Are there steep or wet areas you'd rather not mow anymore? And how much lawn area do you actually use to walk, sit, or play in? And do you want to grow some food somewhere? Just like things to think about of what you want to do in your garden. So do you have an idea of what you'd like your garden to look like? Would you like it to be more of a woodland garden or a meadow, or maybe an edible shrubland? There's lots of different, and it depends on the size of your yard, obviously, how much you can do. Thinking about where good places are for big trees and shrubs. As I said before, you don't want to plant tall trees right under power lines or over utilities in case they have to be repaired over the years. You don't want to lose the tree in the future. So this picture on the side is a garden in the front, a little garden in the front right by the road. The purple, bluish purple is Phlox divaricata, which is just beautiful in spring and smells a little bit like lilac, which is nice. So you want to get inspired and read maybe some native plant books or visit gardens or nature centers with lots of native plants to see what you like and what you'd like to try to do at home. What's your normal garden routine? How much time and effort do you want to put in? Just thinking about how much, because it does, especially while you're just, obviously, if you want to do the planting yourself and then doing the maintenance for the first few years as the plants mature and fill in, you just want to think about how much time you want to put in and not overexert yourself right at the beginning and get tired of it. So do you want to do the planning or gardening yourself, or do you want to hire some help? You can do a combination of both. And Wild Ones, the website has a native garden designs website, with some design ideas. And I have a list of resources at the end of the presentation, just of good websites and books to look at for this stuff. And I think it's okay to start small. Like, it's a chance to learn from your mistakes and enjoy the gardening without getting overwhelmed. So it can be helpful to make a garden plan if you're just like doing your own garden at home. You don't need like a fancy plan. If you can you can even just have like a little simple line drawing on a piece of paper showing different parts of your yard and just say, this is what I want to put in this area and this is what I want to put in this area. Or you can try to, so just sort of like the bottom drawing on the right. It's helpful. It can be a simple line drawing just to get your ideas down and to make it clear, or you can have a more formal looking drawing, like in the top one. Sorry, I'm just moving the screen. Yeah, so it can look, and that can be done if you hire a landscape designer or a landscape architect. You'll probably get a plan. And in that case, if you're hiring someone, having a property survey can be really helpful, but not necessary strictly, depending on what you're doing. Anyway, but another way you can make the plan is you can work from a Google Maps aerial to get a general layout of your property, and just like the general scale of your yard, and then work from that. And if it's just for yourself, the scale doesn't have to be exact. It's helpful, but if it's just to help you keep track of things, that's good. That's good too. So I think And then you could start thinking about what plants do you want to keep? Native plants, healthy mature trees, and then what plants do you want to get rid of? Non-native invasives, obviously, you'd want to get rid of, hopefully, at least with time, if you can't do everything right away, obviously. I think invasive mature trees like Norway maples are a little bit of a gray area, at least. Like, it's probably good to make a long-term plan of how to get rid of it, but don't maybe, like if it's, you know, like a big shade tree, not near natural areas, then, you know, maybe not the first thing on your list, but think about it over time. And while you're removing invasives, especially if you have sort of more wild areas in your yard, and it's not just, you know, like foundation plantings, it's easier to take out invasives from there. But you want to, it's helpful to start by keeping the good areas good, or, you know, keeping the invasives out of the areas that are pretty good still, and then moving to the more difficult areas, just so you don't, the good areas don't get bad while you're working on the tougher spots. That can take a while. And so you want to protect your existing trees. These are two bad examples, obviously. On the right, these are actually both on my street in Albany. On the right, a landscaper to put in more plants over here. I'm not sure if you can see my mouse, hopefully. So they, you know, cleared the sod off the ground right up to the trunk of a tree. And I don't know how deep they went exactly, but you know, they disturbed all the roots of this tree right up to the trunk on like a quarter of the way around the tree. And most tree roots are within a foot or two of the ground, so you don't ever want to do this. You want to always dig really carefully around trees. And then the example on the left, obviously this was a street tree that was removed by the city, but I just want to show like why this tree died. It has a girdling root. I'm not sure if you can see from this side of the tree all the way around to the other side. It's almost like, you know, 2/3 of the way, like 3/4 of the way around the trunk of this tree. So that was planted that way. Like that should never have been planted like that. If you're planting a tree, you want to make sure the roots are spread out away from the trunk and never wrapping around it, because what'll happen as the tree grows, the trunk will get bigger, and then that girdling root will eventually kill the tree because it cuts off, you know, the flow of water and nutrients through the tree trunk. So you want to be careful of that when you're planting trees. And you can check, if you have newer trees, you can check this too, and try to help it before it gets too late, obviously. Other things, you want to make sure you don't drive over the tree roots, and you don't cut into them, and don't scrape the trunk of the bark of the tree trunk. You also want to protect young trees from deer browse with fencing or organic repellent if you get a lot of deer. I know I'm right in Albany, so we don't actually get many deer here, but pretty much everywhere else you have a lot of deer. Yep, and when you're planting, make sure they don't have those girdling roots. So a little bit more about protecting trees. This is just an example I have in my parents' yard that I planted this sugar maple tree that the deer really like to eat that, and they walk there all the time. So I put, this is a 6-foot metal fence just around the sugar maple so that it can get, so that it can grow above the deer browse height. It's really for like, the fencing is more like, this is really for more individual trees to try to help get them established. You know, eventually, obviously I'll remove that. And then this top example in the top right is another example of what you don't want to do to a tree. You don't want to put a layer of rocks around it and build mulch around the bottom of the trunk. Because for one thing, this probably disturbed tree roots, putting in this ring of stone. And also the mulch, it'll smother the tree because the roots need oxygen. So like they can't, so basically the tree roots can't breathe if they're covered in like a deep layer of mulch. So this is, you see this a lot, the mulch volcanoes. of, you have a pile of mulch and they pile it a foot high sometimes around the trunk of a tree, and this will kill a tree. So you don't want to do that. You want to have, if you're going to have mulch around a tree, you want it to be like a donut around the tree, so that it's not, you don't really have any mulch right next to the trunk, and then you have it a few inches away, and not really, you don't ever need mulch to be more than like 3 or 4 inches deep. So land management, just like some basic land management things of how native plants and ecological gardening or natural landscaping are different than what you see a lot in conventional landscapes. You don't want to mow lawn too frequently or too low, because that actually doesn't help it grow any better. And you don't really need to water it in the heat of summer unless it's like a really severe drought. You want to let it go dormant because it's a cool season grass. But I'll talk more about lawns later. And you don't want to apply synthetic pesticides and fertilizers to lawn, because you want to try, if you have a weed problem, you want to try like a specific weed problem, you want to try organic methods and then use that as like a last result or resort. And the synthetic fertilizers they're actually they're ammonia based, which kills soil life. So you don't want to use that either. And it also runs off into water bodies and causes pollution downstream. They actually started making synthetic fertilizer from ammonia after World War II in old munitions plants because it's made of the same stuff. Anyway, but Sir Albert Howard figured out modern composting methods right about this time also, I think in the 30s and 40s. So that's, where you want to get your nutrients from. So leaf blowing is another thing that it's one of my big pet peeves. They're really inefficient and they make a lot of air pollution. Like they're bad for people with asthma because of all the small particulates they make. And it's basically like using a big hair dryer to move leaves around, which is, very inefficient and silly to me. But anyway, and then another thing, you don't want to do the fall cleanup. You want to, because solitary bees and other beneficial insects overwinter in hollow stems and fallen leaves. So you want to leave that material for them to overwinter in. So this is the pesticide application sign that you see everywhere. Well, not everywhere, but depending on where you are, you can see often. And then a clogged storm drain. You want to make sure that's one place you don't want leaves, is clogging a storm drain so that the water can move. So the trouble with lawn, we have way too much of it. It's actually the #1 crop grown in the United States, more than corn or soybeans. So we have a lot of lawn, and it's being treated with pesticides and synthetic fertilizers. They pollute water systems, and they contain chemicals that probably cause cancer in people and people. That's from the World Health Organization. As I said before, synthetic fertilizers are ammonia based, so it'll kill your soil life. And the excess fertilizers run off into water systems, and they contribute to the harmful algal blooms that you see sometimes in the news. That you can't go into natural water bodies because of the harmful algae or the toxic algae. So that starts in what we do at home and on farms also. So conventional lawns are ecological deserts. There's not the soil life or really the beneficial organisms that you want. And most of the water rainfall runs off. So you have more water going into storm drains and running off into water bodies and causing worsening flooding downstream. It's also energy intensive to maintain. It's a lot of carbon emissions that we really don't want to be doing anymore. And they don't provide food for people or wildlife. There's an idea from the book, Planting in a Post-Wild World, that they talk about shifting to thinking of lawn as an area rug, like now, instead of from now we think of it as wall-to-wall carpeting, and we want to think of it as like an area rug, like where do you need it to walk around or to play or do something. Anyway, so this is you know, a lawn that does not have any, doesn't have chemicals used on it, and you know, I think there's obviously some weeds, but it looks pretty nice. You know, there's violets and dandelions, and it's good for pollinators, and especially dandelions. They're actually edible. They're really nutritious green, salad green, the leaves. And so anyway, but they're not native, obviously, but they bloom pretty early and late in the season, so that can be helpful for pollinators too. And then this is a little butterfly, I think a painted lady butterfly, I'm not sure though, on some clover in the yard, growing in the lawn. And this is on a leaf, just a dragonfly sunning itself in the morning, which you don't get in conventional lawns. So I think what you want to start doing as far as like land management stuff, you want to leave the leaves as much as possible. They're really doing a lot for biodiversity and recycling nutrients. There's this little Xerces Society has a bunch of little pictures of Leave the Leaves signs. This one shows a Luna moth that they overwinter in a cocoon in fallen leaves. So there's a lot of butterflies and moths that overwinter in fallen leaves. Some as adults, some as eggs, and some in a cocoon. So you really want to protect them instead of you know, like throwing them away. So the best way to leave the leaves is having native planting beds under native trees to catch most of the leaves and biodiversity. And the next best thing is to rake leaves from lawn into planting beds. It's also pretty good. And then mowing the leaves in the lawn if it's just like too thick, because you don't want the leaves to smother lawn, but having some is not a problem. You just don't want it to be a dense mat. So if you don't have enough places to rake it out of the lawn, then you can mow it to break it up into smaller pieces so it won't smother the lawn. But it's really you know, so at least you're recycling nutrients and not like moving them off site, but you're not, you know, you're killing all those butterflies and moths, so you don't, it's not great. So, and putting the leaves on the curb is kind of a last resort, because you're moving all those nutrients off site, and all that biodiversity is not going to survive. And there's also carbon emissions to move it in a big truck somewhere else, even though it will get composted. But the one place you don't want leaves is storm drain, like I said before, so that you don't want the storm drain to back up and cause so that water, you know, floods in the street or backs up in the street. And use a rake to move leaves instead of a leaf blower. And you could add a pesticide-free or habitat sign like this little Xerces Society one, just to show what you're doing. And move the fall cleanup to spring, and you don't really have to do as much as people usually think. You want to, you can cut back perennial stems I think you want to leave at least a foot or two, because at the bottom, because the bees and beneficial insects that are overwintering in there are still in there until summer. So you really don't want to cut it all the way back. And then you can cut the stems and leave them in the beds as much as possible so that you're recycling the nutrients. This is also a good time. You can, if you have like a meadow, you could cut back trees and shrubs, species that are starting to come in where you might not want them. That's a good time to find them and see that. I think we really want the ecological processes to happen with this type of gardening. You want the leaves recycling nutrients and building new soil, and being habitat for all, lots of beneficial insects. And it also helps the water infiltrate and be filtered by the soil more slowly. And the plant seeds to be allowed to spread and stay up all winter and be food for the wildlife that's here. And you want the biodiversity overwintering in leaf litter, or on soil that's not compacted, because that isn't, some overwinter underground. So if they can't dig into it, that doesn't really help. I think one thing it's easy, people forget sometimes, is that leaves are amazing. They're, we haven't come up with a better design for a solar panel than this. Anyway, but they're free, they're biodegradable solar panels made of 100% natural materials on site. They absorb carbon out of the atmosphere, they grow food for people and wildlife, they grow building materials, make shade, support biodiversity, providing food, cover, and habitat. So they really, and they're really beautiful. So anyways, they're pretty amazing. And absorbing carbon from the atmosphere to help mitigate climate change, and they provide resilience to help adapt to what climate change is already happening. So for design layout, there's another little one of these Xerces signs, that another butterfly that overwinters in fall and leaves, and a little habitat sign from the National Wildlife Federation. So cues to care are basically just ways you can show, to yourself and your neighbors, that what you're doing is intentional, and like why you're doing it, because the average person might still probably doesn't really know about this stuff yet. So you want it to look legible to the landscape, not just like a like a green wall or something that doesn't look that's just is like hard to read. So some ways to do this are to have a mow strip along the edge of the yard. You can have shorter plants along path edges. You could like shorter flowering perennials. And if you have taller ones along the edge, you can cut them in early summer, cut them back partway in early summer. So then they'll still flower, but they'll just be shorter. Like asters, that's a good one to do that with. And the small yard signs, and flowers blooming throughout the year is a big help too, because it's obviously good for pollinators, and it also helps to look more attractive to the average person, and obviously to gardeners. So, and you can edge, if you have a garden bed like right by the road, you could edge that one maybe a little bit more often than somewhere in the back, just so it looks a little neater in more visible areas. And Joan Iverson Nassauer, Nassauer, has done a lot of research on this topic. I put her website, the link to her website here. She's just done a lot of research on this. So plant spacing, you want the layers to knit together when you're gardening with native plants like this. Not like the typical plant spacing with natives, like 2 feet on center. You really want, the different species to grow next to each other and to fill all the niches in the landscape. That makes it harder for weeds to germinate. So like the plant height, like ground covers or taller perennials, you want them growing together. And then you want think about the root depth and type, like if they're fibrous roots or rhizomes or stolons, you just want a combination so that it really fills all the gaps in the landscape. And you also, while you're thinking about the planting, you want to put plants of similar aggressiveness together. Like if you put Canada goldenrod next to it's gonna take over. So you want to, that's a pretty extreme example, but you just want to go with the same similar level of aggressiveness, so that they'll grow together for a long time. And the picture on the left, you can see the white flowers are whitewood aster that's just starting to open up. And then these sort of green, lighter green buds that's Virginia anemone that's just stopped flowering. And that gets pretty cool seed heads that are like sort of like fluffy cotton balls later in the season, which is pretty cool. And there's some wild strawberry. You can just barely see the leaves in the background, but that's a great native ground cover. And then there's also, you can't see, but in the same garden bed, are trout lily and Dutchman's breeches and bloodroot, wild geranium and phlox variegata, and a tree overhead. It's a shade garden. So you also want to think about the landscape structure. You want a mix of plant heights in your landscape to create habitat diversity, like the canopy trees, understory trees, shrubs, perennials, and ground covers. And then you also, while you're thinking about the structure, think about where you want there to be paths and like outdoor rooms for seating, or you know, for kids to run around and play, and pets. Just think about what the kind of structure you want. And The Living Landscape is another great book that talks about this kind of stuff. And you know, if you need some privacy, maybe if you have enough space, you can plant a native hedgerow, which will support 8 times as many birds as non-native hedgerows. I think that's from some Doug Tallamy's research. So succession in the garden through the season and the year and years. The dominant plants, the plants that you'll have growing in your garden will change over time with native gardening. You have cardinal flower here on the top, which is really a beautiful perennial, but it's pretty short-lived, and it's a disturbance plant. In the wild, it grows usually along like stream banks where there's disturbance regularly, so that it needs like a lower competition environment. So you'll have it more earlier on in your garden if you plant it, and then less later. But you know, if something gets dug up or moved, it might come back because the seeds, it's put all those seeds into the seed bank. And then Joe Pyeweed is obviously a longer lived perennial, excuse me, that's more aggressive. So it'll take a few years before it really gets mature, but then those plants will live a long time. And in the seasons, you'll have like throughout the year, a single year, you'll have spring ephemerals to cool season plants, and then warm season plants that can all be planted really close to each other, so that you're really getting, there's a lot ecologically happening and visually happening too. So even in a meadow, you want to think about early, mid, and late successional plants, like the cardinal flower and the Joe Pyeweed. And with the over years, obviously, if you did nothing, you'd get a lot of annuals and perennials at first, and then more shrubs and trees later, unless you manage them in some way. Which really, it just depends on what your goal is. If you want to grow a woodland, then that's great. But if you want to keep a meadow, maybe it's under a power line or something, then you maybe would want to think about where you want that. I think Larry Weiner's book, Garden Revolution, is a really great book on this topic, and he's done a lot of talks about this too. And this is just a plant I really love. It's a wetland plant. It's marsh marigold. It's got really beautiful yellow flowers in spring, and it's a wetland plant, so it'll grow. It grows right out of the mud in the spring. And then, which I just think is amazing. And then it's got these really cool seed heads that come up earlier in the spring. But I think it's a spring ephemeral, so it'll come up early in spring and then be mostly up, and the leaves mostly out and flowering before the trees leaf out in spring. So it can be in a shady area but still get light that time of year. So when you're thinking about what plants to pick for your yard, you want to try to obviously see what grows in the soil, because that's it won't work if that's if it's not the right type of soil. But you really want to supercharge the biodiversity. And Doug Tallamy's more recent book, Nature's Best Hope, has a really great list of recommendations at the end. I think he talked about that most Lepidoptera, or moths and butterflies, overwinter on the ground under native trees. So they really need something like a ground cover or shrubs or perennials growing underneath them, and not lawn, because you know, they'll get chewed up in the lawnmower, or the soil is just too compacted, and the lawn, the grass roots are they're very shallow and dense, so they might not be able to get through it to get underground if that's some go underground. And then while you want to plant the keystone genera for your area, there's like a few genuses of native plant, well, genera of native plants that really form the backbone of local ecosystems, especially trees, because they have so much biomass and can support a lot of caterpillars. This is especially important for producing food. So they really form the basis of a healthy, diverse local food web and ecosystem. So that's really what we're trying to do with this type of gardening. And there's actually the National Wildlife, the NWF, they have a native plant finder, which is a pretty, like a relatively new tool they have on their website, so that you can put in your zip code and then find out what plants host the most, or are the biggest host plants for butterflies and moths in your area. So I put in these numbers are for Albany County. So oaks, support 521 species. Their oaks are typically the biggest one for doing this, pretty much everywhere, but there's lots of different. So then you just have to get the oak species that are local to your area, which I think they also list. So cherries, willows, birches, cottonwoods, blueberries and cranberries and maples are all big for that. And it'll tell you the herbaceous perennials too. So goldenrods are a really big one. They're usually the biggest. They support 138 species, and then asters and sunflowers, which those genuses have kind of been broken up recently. So I just listed these. Anyway, so you want to find what native plants are where you live. This is what the Native Plant Finder website looks like. You just put in your zip code up here, and then it'll give you a list, and you can search by butterflies too. And then the BONAP is the Biota of North America project, I think. But they have, their website has a ton of great maps. You can look up the genus of a plant and then pick the species to see what counties it's native to. This green is the counties. This is where swamp white oak is native in New York State, or in the country. So you can see, well, it's kind of small, but it's, native through the Hudson Valley. And, I wouldn't, with this, if you're like one county away, I wouldn't worry about it. Anyway, but that's just a thought on that. So yeah, this is just kind of thinking about that. Like this is the swamp white oak again on the left. You can see it's native to New York and a lot of the northeastern US. Versus this is Echinacea purpurea, which is really commonly planted. And it's a great medicinal plant, so I still use it anyway. It's not actually native to New York, but it's native to more the Midwest and prairies. But it's not invasive and it's medicinal and a great pollinator plant. So I, think that's still beneficial. So I just wanted to have a slide on goldenrods. They're a really great group of native plants that don't always get they get a bad rap sometimes. But they're a host plant for, over 100 species of butterflies and moths. They're a great fall pollen source for bees and for monarch butterflies when they're getting ready to fly south for the winter. And they don't cause allergies. They're insect pollinated and their pollen's too heavy to be carried on the wind. But they bloom at the same time as ragweed, which does cause allergies, and ragweed doesn't have a showy flower. So that gets confused pretty often. Some species are very aggressive, but a lot of them aren't. So you want to think about it, like, don't plant an aggressive one in a small garden, but if you have a pretty big meadow where you just got rid of a lot of invasive species, then it could be a good thing to use. And there's one for every soil and light condition. Blue stem goldenrod you can grow in the shade, and is a little bit aggressive, but not as much, not really. And dry sun with salt, you can use seaside goldenrod. And then wet sun, early goldenrod, which this picture is of, and if you have a wetland garden, which it's not aggressive and blooms a little earlier, so you can, that's nice too. But, edible native plants, they're kind of the best of both worlds, I think. You know, you're growing food and supporting all the wildlife and habitat too at the same time. Blueberries are a great one. They just need acidic soil. Blackcap raspberry, I think it has a lot of little seeds in it, but you know, it just is a common thing that comes up in a lot of people's yards that, you know, you could use potentially. The only thing you just want to be careful with edible native plant or with edible plants that the soils aren't contaminated where they're coming from. You know, I know in apple orchards, they used to use pesticides that had arsenic in it. So you just want to check that your soils aren't contaminated. But, you know, in your home garden, it's probably not a problem. But in the city, you might want to just, you know, it's good to check. Anyway, so this is some more edible native plants. There's a lot of them. The Three Sisters, the corn, beans, and squash, the Native Americans grew, was, you know, a great combination, a great way to grow corn, because the beans fix nitrogen from the atmosphere, so they're providing nutrients, and they just work really well together. And I think Native Americans, they really cultivated the whole landscape like this too, like thinking about it. They cultivated most of the landscape in some way. Anyway, but and sunflowers are another great one, and wild strawberry, and black walnut, which you know, if you have it, that's good, but it obviously it can release the chemical juglone into the soil, which can, or it does release that, so it can make it harder for other plants to grow around it. So you know, maybe not add it if you don't have it, if you're worried about that. Yeah, there's a whole list: black cherry, black elderberry, juneberry, or serviceberry. That's a great spring blooming small native tree. You know, sugar maple for maple syrup, and shagbark hickory, cattails, wild rice. There's a lot. And you want to have a series of flowers blooming throughout the year, supporting pollinators, and it's a cue to care. You know, helps show people that you are doing this deliberately. So I think the world is full of magical things, patiently waiting for our wits to grow sharper, I think is a great quote for native plants. This is cardinal flower on the left, is just a really cool flower. And then this is wild ginger, which has a really interesting flower in early spring that's, I think, fly pollinated. So it doesn't really smell, but it's pretty interesting. And then this is just the seeds of the native clematis, which I think are really cool. So early spring, you know, this is kind of what, you know, it looks like when you leave the leaves and the stems up. The snow will flatten a lot of them through the winter, and then you're starting to get the green coming up. And you'll get, this is, I'm not sure if you can see my cursor, but this is Phlox divaricata, and this is wild geranium, and some trout lily coming up. This is the trout lily leaf, which looks really cool. Some bloodroot, the Dutchman's breeches, and rue anemone are something you get in spring. Mayapple is another cool native plant. I think it'll grow in more wetland soils, but it kind of comes up out of the ground like a folded up umbrella, I think, and then the leaves unfurl themselves and straighten out. And then they get these cool white flowers underneath the leaves, which is pretty cool. And more for spring, you get the blue flag iris is one of my favorite native plants. It's really pretty. The wild columbine, wild geranium, and this is prairie smoke is really pretty. That's for drier soils. And foam flower is a really pretty, like a woodland understory flower. This is Pachyra aurea, golden groundsel, the yellow flower. It's a really great ground cover and like a workhorse if you want like just a ground cover that you don't have to you know, do anything with. That's a great one. Then summer you can get Canada anemone, and this is Culver's root, looks really cool with the light behind it. And this is sneezeweed, which also doesn't cause allergies. I don't know why they called it that. It's really pretty, with cardinal flower. and then mountain mint in this corner, and Monarda, and I think this is Helenium. So you got a lot of really cool things in summer too, obviously. And fall, you get the leaf color. This is a black gum, and this is an oak tree. New England aster and bluewood aster, and witch hazel gets really cool flowers in November, which is pretty unusual. The seed heads get cool. This is for the iris, iris versicolor. And then this is kind of just a little shade garden that you've got a few different asters and goldenrods blooming. And turtlehead is another fall one that looks really cool, I think. Some of the wildlife you get in the garden. You got hummingbirds on, this is on trumpet honeysuckle. So they're so cool. You got hummingbirds on cardinal flower too, because it's got those long tubular flowers. And then I think this is a painted lady butterfly on a wild aster, and then a little bumblebee crawling into a turtlehead flower. And then a frog or a toad, I'm not sure. Then a woodpecker on a tree snag. You can leave, if you have a dead tree in your yard, you can cut it, cut the top off so that it's not a danger to anybody, but you can leave a part of the snag standing for wildlife. It's a really great wildlife tree. And then this is a bumblebee on sneezeweed. They love to just walk all over the flowers. It's pretty cool to watch. But, so you want to get those ecological connections in the landscape with native plants. Milkweed is a really good example that a lot of people, at least in this area, are familiar with. They need to use the milkweed as their host plant. And there's several different native milkweeds that are good to use. This is common milkweed on the top corner. It's pretty aggressive, so you want to not use it in maybe smaller, really small gardens. But the flowers are pretty and smell like lilac in the summer, which is pretty cool. This is some of what the seed pods look like. And then this is a monarch butterfly on some swamp milkweed flowers. But there's lots of connections like this in the landscape. You also have, like, the Karner blue butterfly uses blue lupin as a host plant. And the Karner blue butterfly is endangered, partially because of the introduced hybrid lupins, which you don't ever plant those. Because they hybridize with the native ones, which then make them useless to the butterflies. So there's lots of connections like this in the landscape. So that's, if you use native plants, then you're supporting those connections, whereas you're not if you don't use them. And Aldo Leopold has a good quote, to keep every cog and wheel is the first precaution of intelligent tinkering. Just, you have to keep all the pieces if you want it to keep working. Anyway, so this is I have a couple slides of a monarch butterfly. This is the caterpillar, obviously, eating some swamp milkweed. And then it started making its cocoon, or not, chrysalis, I think, on a tree fence that I had, like 20 feet from our front door of our house. And then, yeah, so the little caterpillar turns into this. I think it's chrysalises for butterflies, but I always forget that. So that, a few weeks later, it starts to get translucent, and you can almost see the butterfly wings through here, which I think is really cool. And then the monarch butterfly comes out of that, and you can see the chrysalis here, still where it had come out of. This is the butterfly was like sunning itself and stretching its wings before it started flying after it came out, which is pretty cool. So where to get native plants? There's lots of like local native nurseries are the best places, or to get volunteer plants in your yard are the best ways to get native plants. Generally, the straight species is preferable over cultivars. I think I have a slide on that in a minute. You don't really want to buy plants from big box stores, though. They're not local ecotype. They don't have the local genetics with the local plant populations. And those are all genetically identical. They're propagated in a lab by tissue culture, actually, not really by seed usually. And they're treated with systemic pesticides before they get shipped to the nursery or to the box store. And they're shipped halfway across the country usually, so that's a lot of carbon emissions too. And you never want to buy wild collected native plants unless there's a site that's about to be developed and they're saving them from that. But that's pretty unusual and not really ideal anyway. But so here are some local native plant nurseries. These are just what I know of. So there could be more that I'm not aware of. But the Catskill Native Nursery, the Fernery, Helia Native Nursery, Wild Things Rescue Nursery. Those are some good ones nearby. And in Central New York, there's a few more that I used to go to when I lived there. And then if there's a native plant nursery, if there's a specific plant you want and you want to grow it by seed or in a certain container size, you can ask them if they would be willing to grow it, and they might be able to do that, for the next year. So if you give them some notice, they can plan ahead for stuff like that. So volunteer plants are really great. There's, the common milkweed, and this is an aster, a white aster. I'm not really sure which one actually, but it's really beautiful and flowers a lot in fall. And New England aster and verbena. The blue vervain is a really cool one too that you can get in wetland areas. Goldenrods. And this is daisy fleabane, the little white one on the bottom. It's a little native annual. That's pretty cool that you get also too. And sensitive fern is another one I found. These are some you could find that I've found in lawn or garden beds. The common blue violet, oak seedlings, yellow wood sorrel is a cool one that people get in their yards a lot and think is nothing, so they just pull it out. And wild strawberry too. I've found in a lot of people's yards. And blue-eyed grass, I found just a little bit of it growing in our vegetable garden, so I moved it. And it's anyway, but it's you never know what you're going to find. And this rose pink, we found this growing in the lawn that we don't treat with chemicals. And it's actually, I think it's threatened or endangered in New York. And so, if we treated it with herbicides, we never would have, it would just have been gone. Anyway, but some ways to encourage native volunteer plants. Learn what's growing in and around your yard. This meadow actually, it was our old vegetable garden, but I didn't actually plant. There's a few grasses here that I planted, and then this black-eyed Susan, but I didn't plant any of these in the back. This was all done by seed, seed of just a few that were growing on this side, on the left side of the garden. So yeah, you just want to think about what you have and try to spread it if you can. Like if there's oak trees nearby, squirrels will probably plant them if you leave an area and then check what's growing before you cut it. You can check that in the spring too in lawn and like decide if there's a tree growing in a place you want it, you can keep that or not. So when you think that those are design decisions you're making when you're thinking about that kind of stuff. So that's good to keep in mind. You also want to recognize undesirable plants and invasives and remove them before they get established. Like once I found one purple loosestrife growing in here and cut it, immediately before it had a chance to flower, set seed, to keep it out of there. And if you want to do that with the seeds, you can clear an area either near where they're growing, which is what I did with this, or you can collect the seeds and move them to another area, or grow them up like in a plug tray or a pot to propagate them. Just native cultivars. There's lots of I don't know, I tend not to use cultivars. There's just a lot of unknowns and like possible risks we don't really understand. Like there's a cultivar that crosses the great blue lobelia with the cardinal flower, which are the same genus. But it actually, the blue is pollinated by bumblebees, and the red is pollinated by hummingbirds. So so the cross, I think it looks like one of them, but it really doesn't have, I think it looks like the blue, but it doesn't have the pollen. So, and it's not, they're specific to pollinators. So it's not, you're kind of losing that connection and you don't really know what's happening with that exactly, or what the impacts are. So it depends on the hybrid. Like Echinacea purpurea, white swan is actually just a naturally occurring white variety in the species. So that's not really, having negative impacts on pollinators, but just in general, we don't really understand it. So I would kind of avoid it. And Annie White is with University of Vermont is doing, I think, ongoing research on this subject. And I think I've probably tried to get too much stuff in here, so I'm just gonna go kind of quickly through the last for a couple more minutes, and then we can stop for questions. Just invasive, DEC has an invasive plant list. Don't buy anything on this list. They have a list of prohibited plants that are illegal to sell that you do still see sometimes in nurseries, so you want to be careful of that. And regulated plants that they just like need a warning label on them, I think, to sell them. But I would not buy any of these. I think I think most, autumn olive and border privet, burning bush, buckthorn, Japanese barberry, multiflora rose, oriental bittersweet, and the non-native clematis. There's a lot more, obviously. This is just a few. Bittersweet is a really common vine or invasive vine that's coming up in the capital region. So this is just, one growing at a park next to a tree that the landscapers didn't know to look for. So you just want to, it's easiest to get rid of them when they're small, obviously. So that's good. Porcelain berry is another really bad one. I think that they're really trying to keep out of the area. So it's a good one to look for. Chinese silvergrass, the miscanthus, that's another common one you see in gardens that's really invasive, and you just don't want to have that. And the wetlands ones, there's a lot more, obviously. And then aquatic plants, I've seen parrot's feather grown at nurseries, so you don't want to buy that even if it's just for a pond. Obviously hydrilla and milfoil and water chestnut are all bad ones. Anyway, and this is a pipe covered in quagga mussels or zebra mussels, I forget which one, but yeah, so you just aquatic invasives are a big problem for wildlife and infrastructure. So anyway, that's so if you have some invasives growing in your yard, you don't want to buy more. You want to stop them from spreading and start removing them and replacing them with natives. Where you start depends on how much land you have, but I think, these are a couple of hazardous invasive plants that you don't want to touch, and you want to, if you come in contact with them. Giant hogweed is really nasty. It's a big, tall perennial. There's a lot more information on the DEC website if you want to check that too. And wild parsnip is another one that I see more commonly around. But these both, the sap will burn your skin, and I think it reacts with sunlight, but the burns on your skin can last for years and be very severe and make your skin very sensitive to sunlight for years. So just, be really, keep an eye out for these. Burning bush, instead of burning bush, use black chokeberry. Instead of Bradford pear, grow amelanchier, which is Juneberry or serviceberry. And some non-native plants are okay are fine to have. Apples and rhododendrons and dandelions aren't doing any ecological harm, but but I would still be careful introducing non-native, non-invasive plants, just non-native plants, even if they aren't invasive, because you don't always know what could be coming along with it. I think Brooklyn Botanic Garden, accidentally introduced the chestnut blight by introducing ornamental Chinese chestnuts. That chestnut blight wiped out 4 billion American chestnut trees. So you really just, you could be introducing a fungus or an insect or a plant pathogen in addition to the plant being invasive. So, or, if the plant could be invasive. So there's just a lot of risks that you don't really know about. So I wouldn't introduce new ones. That's, anyway, that's. So I'm kind of just gonna skip to the end. Ticks. Possums eat 90% of the ticks that get on them, so they're like tick vacuums in the landscape. So those are really good. Sorry, I kind of over planned for this. So, deer obviously are the browsing and eating the whole understory of the woods, so they can't regenerate is a big problem. Aldo Leopold had a line about that in his book. Just that a mountain, thinking like a mountain, that the mountain would be more afraid of deer than over deer browse if all the wolf population was eradicated. Anyway, but Nature Wars is a great book about that. Then light pollution, you know, we have a lot less stars in the sky than there used to be. The End of Night is a great book about that. But this also has an impact on biodiversity for birds, and especially nocturnal beneficial insects and pollinators. You know, a lot are killed by being attracted to artificial light at night. So if you want to just do lighting for safety, you don't want glare in your eyes anyway, because it makes it harder to see everywhere else. So you want the lights at night to be motion activated, so they're only on when needed. So it's not attracting those pollinators all the time. Only light the area that needs it, and don't have them be brighter than they need to be. And you want the light pointing downwards so that you can see without getting the glare in your eyes. And if you want to protect fireflies, which live most of their life underground, you don't use pesticides, leave the leaves, and keep the lights down. And don't use bug zappers because they mostly kill beneficial insects and not mosquitoes. Yeah. So for mosquitoes, you can use an oscillating fan to try to keep them away if you're just like sitting outside on a porch. They're not actually very good flyers, so that's helpful. And spraying the yard for mosquitoes doesn't really help. It kind of knocks the mosquito population down briefly, but it also kills all the beneficial insects that eat mosquitoes. So it's not really long-term helping. You can try a mosquito larva trap that I think Doug Tallamy has talked about. It's just like basically a bucket that you put a mosquito duck in, that you try to attract mosquitoes and put a mosquito dunk in to kill them before they can, you know, spread around your yard. Anyway, that's, so sorry, I'm over time. So just really briefly how the planet and biodiversity are doing. I think we all know not very well. We've lost actually a third of the world's arable land in the last 40 years. There's a hypoxic zone in the Gulf of Mexico. This is from fertilizer runoff. It basically takes all the all the oxygen out of the water. So so that fish can't live there. And it was 6,300 square miles last year. North America's lost 3 billion birds in the last 50 years, more than 1 in 4. Overfishing of oceans is obviously having really bad impact on, you know, on ocean health. 40% of the world's plants are at risk of extinction. The oceans are 30% more acidic since the Industrial Revolution started. They're becoming too acidic for shellfish to grow because the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, it dissolves in water to make carbonic acid, so it's making the oceans more acidic. So that's bad, obviously. And you know, clear cutting rainforests to grow palm oil or for cheap lumber. You know, those are all obviously big problems. But I think obviously these are big global problems, but I think this, at least a part of the solutions to these, we can do at home right now and in parks and our neighborhoods. So like with good land management and native plants, they can really be a big part of, they can be a helpful part of solving the climate change and biodiversity crises. And you know, you can turn your yard into a beautiful living landscape that pulls carbon out of the atmosphere and stores it either underground in soil or in living matter. Anyway, so I think that's a really, you know, there's all these big problems, but we can do something about it at home right now without, you know, a big international agreement to try to solve it. It's kind of like the low-hanging fruit, you know, I think. But here are some resources. There's some great books about native plants, and I can either share this list or maybe by email or something, because there's a lot. Yep, so there's a lot of great ones. And then some resources for websites for invasives and native plants and soil tests. Yeah, I think so. That's all. I think just this quote from Aldo Leopold I'll end on. The oldest task in human history is to live on a piece of land without spoiling it. So I think that's what we're really trying to do with this stuff. So yeah, so that's it. Thank you. Sorry for going over. I'm not sure. Sorry.
Actually, that was a beautiful talk. Thank you so much, Laura. I've learned so much today, and our chat column is going to take us even further over the timeline. Feel free to leave if you need to, but there are an awful lot of very good questions here. Laura, I'll just start with the first one and we'll just go down in order. Okay, so Jan is wondering what your thoughts on pine needles for mulch are. Do they have the same benefit as leaves?
I think so. I mean, I would just, I think I would leave any needles or leaves under the tree they come from. I think would be good. But
okay. There, and Cremilda comments, there are no recommendations for oak species on the Native Plant Finder website. Where else can we find this information?
You can look, I guess there are a lot of, the BONAP website you can look at to see if there's one for your county. I'm trying to think. I think you can look also, I forget which website it is. The New York Flora Atlas. I think if you go on their website and then you type in your county, you can get a list of what plants are native to your county. So that I think you should be able to find that there.
Okay. And Joyce would like to know, how do you make the soil more acidic for blueberries? Is fertilizing with Holly-tone enough?
I'm not sure actually. I'm not sure.
Okay, hang on. I'm just putting your pearls of wisdom down here. Sorry about that, Joyce. Carrie would like to know, what are some resources for helping identify invasives on your property?
Yeah, sure. IMAP invasives is a good one. Well, I guess that's for reporting. But I think if you think you have an invasive, you can put it on there and then it might get confirmed if it is. There's also like plant ID websites or apps. I'm trying to think. I think, there's some Wildflowers of the Field in the Field and Forest is a good book for looking at weeds, identifying plants, and Weeds of the Northeast is another good one. There's also an app for your phone. I'm forgetting what it's called. Sorry. I thought I had that written somewhere. Oh, iNaturalist. That's a good one. So you can take a picture of it and then you can get help identifying it. Yeah.
Okay. And Jennifer Kerr, I'm sorry, has shared a resource with us. Is a good resource that I've been using a lot there, native to Ontario, Canada, but since we're neighbors with New York, it might work for you too. And this was OntarioWildflowers.com.
Oh, cool.
In terms of locating invasives on your property. Peter would like to know, is there a resource for blooming times?
I'm not sure. I think it's kind of, like in native plant books that'll come up, there's some helpful nursery websites too that list that. I have Prairie Moon Nursery and Prairie Nursery. They have a bunch, especially for perennials. They have a lot. And sometimes native nurseries, like I know Amanda's Garden is a native nursery in Western New York, that they have a good list of bloom times on their website too.
Okay. And let me see what's next. Jennifer Kerr is again asking, we have a black walnut in the backyard and I plan to plant jug loam tolerant plants under it. How far away do I have to plant non-jug loam plants? And will the juglone tolerant plants act as a buffer between the tree and the non-tolerance?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, I'm not sure exactly, and those trees get pretty big too, so I don't know how mature it is. We had one in my parents' yard that started out small and then gradually overtook our vegetable garden. But I think definitely outside the drip line, because all parts of the plant, like the leaves and the roots and the walnuts themselves, obviously have the juglone in it. So you want to get it at least, I think, I don't know, at least a ways away from the drip line. I'm not sure on the exact distance though. As far as them being a buffer, I'm not sure. I mean, maybe from the what comes out of the roots and the leaves, maybe, but I'm not sure.
Okay. Anne would like to know, what are some good local native nurseries in this region? Saratoga County and Capital District. Oh, never mind, she says.
Oh.
And then I did comment that we're developing a resource list for our Capital Region New York website, and stay tuned. We're getting there. There's a lot to search out and find. Anne says, thank you. Marty is saying that you need to protect the tiny oak seedlings when you find them. The deer eat them. Amy would like to know if we can get a copy of these slides.
Yeah, sure. I think so. Yeah, we can figure that out.
Okay. And yeah, they're pretty rich slides. I would like the list of resources, please. Can we get a copy? Joyce would like a list of resources. Mandy is saying that was an excellent presentation. And Chris is saying sharing the book list and resource list by email is a great idea. Thank you. Judith says, please do share the resource list. Peter says, thanks, Laura. Janet thinks this is a very comprehensive presentation, and we all can see that you love your topic. Great job. Jan says, I live in North Carolina. I have to follow up on that. I'm not sure. It's a direct message to me. I'm not sure what that's. Jan, are you able to type a little bit more and let me know what that was in context to? Judith comments that Doug Tallamy has an entire book on oaks. Joyce says, thank you for your comprehensive talk. And Carrie would like to add more native plants to the floor of her deciduous forest, which is more like packed ground recycled roots than soil. Any suggestions how to enhance without causing any negative damage to the trees?
I'm not sure. I think, you can put in, if you want to add more native plants, the smaller, the pot size they come in, that's probably the better, just to disturb less soil, and obviously be careful while you're digging. I would say if it's like really compacted, you could try bringing in like compost, but you do want to be careful. They're getting I think I kind of went through the slide. The Asian jumping worm is an invasive earthworm that's sort of finding some of it in the area. So you just want to be really careful when you bring in soil, or plants too, I guess, for that matter, that you're not bringing any of that in. But that would be a way.
Okay, and Laura, I've heard pine needles are great for adding acidity to blueberry soil.
Oh.
Can I speak to that?
Yes, ma'am.
Pine needles take a really long time to decompose and make it acid. So if it's under a big pine tree, it might be acid from the pine needles. The best thing to do is to go to your local county cooperative extension and do a soil test, and they will tell you exactly what your pH is, and they'll tell you how much of what to use for whatever you're growing there. For example, blueberries. So use that county cooperative extension as your resource. They have them in North Carolina too.
Okay, thank you for following up on North Carolina. Okay, Mandy says, iNaturalist is good to identify, and then you can look on the list and cross-reference if it's invasive. Laura and John, Growing a Greener World has a good episode on growing fruit. He goes in depth about blueberries. Basically, if your soil isn't acidic enough, he suggests using pots and overwintering them. And he has put a link up to that website if anybody would like to catch that before we end today. Carrie's saying, picture this. The app is Picture This. Joyce can call her cooperative extension for recommendation, increasing soil acidity. Carrie says, thank you. I've learned so much. Susan thought this was very interesting and informative. Thank you so much. Have to leave for another Zoom meeting now. Mandy says, my entire pollinator garden is under our black walnut and I haven't lost anything yet. Chris says, North Creek Wholesale Nursery has good plant information online. FYI, see you can save the chat. Okay, I'm sorry, I made a mistake here. If you see the 3 little dots on the right side of this screen, right above where you type comments, you can save the chat to your computer. So anybody can save this chat that they need to. Thanks so much. Laura wants to know, what if your trees already have a mulch volcano? What can you do?
Oh, yeah. You can definitely do something about that. If it's been there, if it's new, if it's relatively new, you can just move the mulch away from it, just so that it's not right up against the trunk, and spread it out. If it's been there a while, sometimes the tree will try to put out shallower roots, like in the mulch above the normal root crown. So that if that's happening, I think you can just clear away the mulch and like cut those shorter roots, I think. But yeah, that's I think just getting away from the trunk, you can definitely do.
Okay. Jennifer says, thank you, Mandy. Denise says, thank you. Great presentation. Laura and John say, Carrie, if you don't have a lot of litter on the forest floor, check to see if you have Asian jumping worms. That might be your issue. Ha, great minds. Carrie says, thanks. And Laura says, we still can't grow blueberries under our white pines as our soil is very alkaline. No amount of Hollytone will fix that. And that is our last comment of the day, unless somebody has something to add.
Once again, I wrote back to them directly, but you need to talk to the cooperative extension, bring in a soil test. They'll tell you exactly how much, probably elemental sulfur or aluminum sulfate or something. They'll tell you exactly how much to add to your soil by square foot.
Okay. Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Anything else? Let's see what we have here. We've got 3 new messages. Okay. Wynn says seed companies, Hudson Valley Seed Company or Fruition Seeds have information on their websites about planting times. Chris says right plant, right place. And Amy says should probably just add plants that your existing soil will like. And I think that's it. Well, Mandy, thank you very much. It was absolutely magnificent presentation. You did a beautiful job. We thank you.
Thank you.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and end the meeting unless anybody has anything else. I've just got to thank you at the very end. Oh, more. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.